Welcome to Freaked Out with your co-hosts, Liz and Landon.
What's up, everybody?
Today we will be covering the case of the West Mesa murders.
Now, before we get into this case, we noticed in the comment section we have had a few people asking about assistance with the patron side. Unfortunately, we cannot assist in the comment section. We do have a Facebook group, and that is Freaked Out Podcast on Facebook. And that is where we can assist you in most issues there. We also have a technical group over there as well in Messenger, where you can speak to either myself, Liz, Catherine, or some other people who are moderators in the group who can definitely help you fix those issues. Most of them. I do not want to say all of them, but most of them we can fix.
Absolutely. All right, let's get back to today's episode. Now, this episode is all in relation to sex workers, and due to their line of work, sadly, they don't get really seen as a big deal case.
Definitely shouldn't matter what anyone's line of work is, or their age, their gender, their creed, their nationality, their sexual orientation, or their gender identity. All and every person's life should matter. All lives matter.
I also found it strange that they removed this documentary too. I think this case should still be accessible. What happens if someone knows something?
Well, that leads to people then giving information that people don't want out there. But more than anything else, we want to refresh and remind people of all the cases in the West Mesa area.
Now, the West Mesa murders are of the killings of the 11 women whose remains were found buried in 2009 in the desert on West Mesa in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the U.S.
Several suspects have been named, but no one was arrested or charged. While the killings were initially believed to be of the work of a serial killer, the involvement of a sexual trafficking ring has also been suspected.
A detective by the name of Ida had been assigned to this case and basically went to work. And she was probably the only person who was working on this case all those years prior.
Now, an anonymous tip to authorities at the APD and the FBI linked the murders to a suspect from Central America. Police have also suspected the involvement of a sex trafficking ring operating through neighboring Texas that targets prostitutes during events throughout the Southwest and Southern and Western United States, especially regularly scheduled events such as the New Mexico State Fair in this case, also to take advantage of reliably heavier traffic.
The small fragment of human trafficking rings involve numerous population centers, including Las Vegas, Nevada, El Paso, and Keelan in Texas, and Denver in Colorado.
Between 2001 and 2005, 11 women were buried by an unknown assailant in a bank in Albuquerque's West Mesa, in an underdeveloped area within city limits. Now, satellite imagery was taken between 2003 and 2005 that shows tire marks and patches of disturbed soil in the area where the remains were recovered.
Now, by 2006, development had stopped in this area, and soon after the site was disturbed, buried, and plated for residential development.
Big shock there. Now, due to 2008 housing bubble collapse, development on the west side halted before housing could be built at the burial site. After neighbors had complained of flooding in the plated site due to the buried bodies there, the developer built a retaining wall to channel the stormwater to a retention pond that was built in the approximate area of the burial site, now inevitably exposing those bones that have come to surface.
And on February 2nd, 2009, a woman walking a dog felt like this area was perfect to take her dog because it was a big place and, she can let him off leash. And they ended up finding human bones and obviously reported it right to the police.
The police wanted to see if they could find the rest of the body, and they were able to find 3 bodies, and then they found more.
Imagine being the police officer finding all of these bodies. I feel like I failed my job with overwhelming sadness.
They may have found the bodies a little earlier if the market didn't crash and the halt did not stop all the new builds.
As a result of the subsequent police investigation, authorities discovered the remains of 11 women and girls and a fetus buried in the area. They were all ages between 15 and 32 years of age. Most were Hispanic, and most were involved with drugs and sex work.
Now, if these killings were suspected between 2003 and 2006, that is a long time before they even stumbled upon any of these bodies.
It really is, and the remains discovered in 2009 were identified as young girls and women, and they all disappeared between 2001 and 2005.
On December 9th of 2010, Albuquerque police released 6 photos of the 7 unidentified women who may have been linked to the West Mesa area. Now, police would not say how or where they obtained any of these photos.
The first body to be identified was Victoria Chavez, due to dental records. Victoria had been missing since March of 2005.
She was not reported as formally missing at that point. Her family hadn't seen her for at least a year prior.
Victoria had been involved with sex work and drugs at the time of her disappearance. She was also on probation, and when they found her, she didn't have any clothes on.
Now, the next remains to be figured out was Michelle Valdez. She was approximately 4 months pregnant at the time.
Her father said she was a very kind woman who would give the shirt off her back to just about anyone. She already had a young daughter, and she was a good mom.
She was aspiring to be a singer or a lawyer. She had so many hopes and dreams. Sadly, she fell into the drugs and had a very hard time getting herself out of it.
She normally didn't go away often. She would disappear here and there for a few days, but she usually would contact her father asking for money. Her dad would beg her to come home.
Now, her father reported his daughter missing in February of 2005.
According to her mother, the cases were not taken seriously. Shocker. It was ignored. No leads to follow through. The mother had heard from around in the neighborhood that she had been stabbed many times, and her remains were disposed at West Mesa.
The third body to be identified was that of Cinnamon Elks, who was also identified through dental records. She also was reported missing in 2004.
She had also fallen into the drugs and sex work. She got into a lot of trouble. She had also a lot of drug charges and had a hard time really determining when she went missing exactly.
She was arrested in July of 2004, and then a month later, it was supposed to be her birthday, and she always called her family for her birthday, but this birthday, she did not call. So the family decided that something must have been wrong, and then they also reported her missing.
Her mother went to the police station, and again, they didn't take it seriously.
Again, big shocker. They thought that she was just a 32-year-old woman, and they said it didn't matter. She'd probably come home.
Yeah, they didn't do any missing person paperwork until December.
The urgency of this is just unreal.
Talk about a bunch of people that don't want to do their job. Why in the hell do some people even really get into law enforcement anyway?
To be above the law, that's why they get into it, not to serve and protect like they should. Now, people always ask us, why don't you work with the police? Well, it's because shit like this. Prime fucking example. Police don't want to do their job.
Absolutely agree. If police did their job better, then sure, let's go. Otherwise, I think Landon and I can do a better job ourselves. The only thing I would contact the police officers for is if I ever stumbled upon a body.
Which even then, maybe not, because they probably would blame it on us.
Good point.
Anyways, Cinnamon's mother also heard rumors as well around the neighborhood just before her disappearance. Cinnamon was speaking to a dirty cop saying that they were picking up sex workers, chopping their heads off, and burying them in West Mesa.
Now, when it's a cop, they feel hopeless. The family feels hopeless. The friends feel hopeless, scared even.
Now, the next remains that were to be identified were that of 24-year-old Julie Nito, also identified by her dental records.
Thankfully, they still had their teeth. She was another woman that loved her family. She grew up with her single mom and her sister was her best friend. She was also a mother.
She began drug use at the age of 19. She spiraled out of control, but it looks like she did try her hardest to get back on track because she had a young son, although sadly she couldn't be there for him.
Her family said that she did try her hardest to visit and be there for him. She did always give him presents, and she was reported missing in 2004.
Just shortly after Cinnamon was last seen, her disappearance was also not taken seriously. The biggest thing that had been common was that all four of these women knew each other due to being in the sex work field.
In April, they were able to identify victims number 5 and 6. 22-year-old Monica Candelaria. She was a family member who would always try and make you laugh. She was always laughing at herself as well.
Monica was last seen on May 11th of 2003. She was reported missing 2 weeks later. Somebody close to the family came to them about more rumors.
Now, these rumors are spreading like wildfire. They'd also told the family she had been killed and buried in West Mesa. This case apparently was one of the only cases that police did some sort of follow-up or leads, and eventually it became cold.
These cases all have the same pattern, and really no one could put this pattern together.
Other than Ida, but obviously they didn't take her seriously either.
Now, the next woman to be identified was that of 26-year-old Veronica Romero. Not a lot of information on Veronica at all, but same similar pattern. She was in sex work, she also was hooked on drugs, and she also lived in the war zone.
It was like a puzzle trying to figure out the parts of these women. Some of these girls being at a digging site, it took them a while to determine whose body part was whom. I'm not even sure or convinced that they still have yet to figure it all out properly. I'm also not convinced that these developers didn't see these remains.
I agree with you. There's no way you didn't see this before you started digging. They just probably thought it was just going to be like 1-2 bodies and, oh, we'll just move them or something, you know? But they didn't. They kept on going because if a body was found, let alone 11, they would then have to stop working and stop the building, and they did not want any sort of delays.
They had to send boxes of remains to Texas to figure out the rest of who belonged to who. Like, it was exactly that, like putting puzzle pieces together.
And then these poor families also waiting on the edge of their seats to find something out if it was, in fact, anyone from their family.
Now the next victim to be identified is 24-year-old Doreen Marquez. She was a popular victim amongst the board. Now, she grew up in West Mesa, and she got good grades, was a cheerleader, and she went to West Mesa High School.
And she also lived in a very good part of town with her partner and her 2 children. She threw her kids these extravagant birthday parties, and she was also a firecracker.
She always dressed up to look her best. She was beautiful. And when she was 23 years old, her boyfriend went to jail and started the beginning of this vicious cycle.
Now she fell deep into the drugs and got into sex work. There was some speculation on when she was last seen. Now her family says that it was October of 2003 when she was dropping her kids off at school. And then a friend also said that they had last seen her in 2004, in December to be exact. And then that is when she got reported missing.
I'm going to say both are accurate. Family and her had a bit of a falling out. She was at her lowest low at this point. Lots of shame. I think she went into hiding before she actually had gone missing.
Her family really didn't know anything about the sex work side of things. They only found it as presumed.
Yeah, sadly, I feel like she sort of just got into it right at the time she disappeared from her family. Hence, the shame. And she didn't look back after that.
Now they found the remains of a very different woman. Now this one, she was only 15, and she was of the African American descent, and she had acrylic nails, and they were a very specific and unique design on her nails.
Thank God for that. I'm glad she had the unique design on her nails.
Now they were able to determine that she had a broken nose at some point, and she also had been stabbed at some point before her death.
Abuse. I see foster parent abuse. These women, none of them had it easy.
And finally, in 2009, they were able to identify the remains as Salonia Edwards as victim number 8. She had run away from her foster home, and her biological parents had been in prison since she was 5 years old.
She ran away from Lawton, Oklahoma. She began to travel down the I-40 with a group of women looking for sex work, and she was last seen in Denver, Colorado. She then made her way to New Mexico.
Victim number 9 being Virginia Cloven. She had a great intelligence and did very well in school. Her school teachers always wanted to adopt her. She also had 2 brothers, and she was very close with her father.
Tragedy struck, and before her own death, Virginia's brother was shot and killed. A homicide, and Virginia didn't take it well, so she ran away.
Now, Virginia was only 17 years old, and she ended up with her grandfather. She then left there and moved in with a boyfriend. Now, the boyfriend ended up being hit by a car, and then he ended up in a coma.
Imagine all the men in your life just vanishing. She ended up homeless in the war zone as a sex worker and on drugs. Her dad begged her to come home, and she would see him, but she pushed him away a lot, and honestly, I don't blame her.
Now, in 2004, she told her dad that she had met a new guy, and she wanted to get married, and she would bring him over so that he can see him. Now, she then went entirely silent and then later was reported missing.
Victim number 10, known as 23-year-old Evelyn Salazar, disappeared March to April of 2004, along with her cousin Jamie Barella, whom would be found soon after.
Now, she was with her family and offered to take her cousin Jamie to the park, which was just outside of the war zone. Now, neither one of them came back home. Leading us to victim number 11, which would be Jamie Barella. She was only 15 years old, and she was also the only one who was not involved in drugs or sex work at all.
Wrong place, wrong time. These sick fucks just watched and followed.
Now, the one thing that all of these women did have in common was no real cause of death. They all believed to be strangled or suffocated since there was no real wounds.
No other DNA was found at the burial site. They interviewed at least 200 other sex workers in the area at the time and see if they knew anything. And I really don't feel like they all came forward talking about what they really did know, but that's just my point of it.
FBI played the main role due to it being a serial killer. Now, media went quiet based upon the fact that they were drug-addicted sex workers.
I would say that there's a secondary reason, because the police clearly did not do their job in this case. And, I mean, it would put some shame on the police department, you know?
Absolutely, because, I'm sure, if not all of the families, most of them gave as much detail and no one took it seriously at all.
And they never called this serial killer an actual serial killer. They didn't want to scare the community as an excuse, is what they said.
Well, I call bullshit on that. This person wasn't caught, so warning people probably should have been a priority.
They should be scaring them into being safe. Didn't even alert the sex workers in the area. Their motto seems to be, oh well.
Yeah, they were probably thinking, oh, better them than, regular blue-collar people working, Even though all of them go and visit, down these parts of the areas when they don't want to go home to their wives. But that's for another day. Now, to say that the community was pissed off would be an understatement. A lot of the family and friends were very hurt by this. And most of the community did protest, but it didn't get anywhere, sadly.
Bad call on the FBI and the police. If it was a group of celebrities in Hollywood, I'm sure we'd hear about it. In fact, it would have been filmed and made into a fucking movie.
And they all would have been found.
Exactly.
Now, in 2009, they had stated that they had narrowed it down to about 5 suspects. Now, we aren't going to talk about all of them, but we will focus on 2 of the main ones.
First suspect, Lorenzo Montoya. only lived 1 to 2 miles away from where the bodies were located. He was arrested a few times for soliciting for sex. He also hurt and abused women. Shocking. This particular situation, he had actually drove a woman out in the middle of a dead-end road and attempted to kill her. And of course, they arrested him and he only had $2 in his pocket.
I just don't think that he would be somebody, he already tried to do it and then he got caught pretty much right away. And
Right.
This person who is doing this is very meticulous and clearly got away with 11 killings. This guy couldn't even get away with one.
I agree with that.
Now, he was able to get off. Shocker. He was able to continue to keep doing this to women. In 2006, though, he was killed. He had met a 19-year-old sex worker named Shakira Hill.
Other individuals were missing, other burial sites, but he went on and raped and strangled this 19-year-old girl.
Now, he met her online in a chat room, and then he had told her to come meet him at his trailer. What he didn't know was that Shakira was working for a pimp named Frederick Williams, and he brought her to the trailer, and he was outside to monitor the whole time.
Apparently, he gave them enough time for him to, not only do what he needed to do, but he ended up walking up on Montoya, dragging Shakira's lifeless body out, attempting to toss her in his trunk. Now, right then and there, he shot Lorenzo. He had bound her with duct tape, and they found her clothes in a bag. He had killed her successfully.
Now, the authorities had already been looking into him as a suspect, and the tracks led to his trailer home and the burial site.
They had also found porn in his home, tons and tons of it, and they had found recordings of him and sex workers. There was even one recording of all you hear is tape and a trash bag. The video is disturbing to say the least, because you know exactly what he's doing in it.
Absolutely. We did watch this video, and it was very disturbing.
The reason I wanted to bring up Montoya is because I do not believe that he was responsible for their deaths. He did kill sex workers, and I'd say about 10 women in total, and I'd say a few of them were able to get away as well. He was sloppy. He didn't give a fuck when, where. He just killed people when he felt like it. He didn't give a shit if he had an audience or not.
Now, the second main suspect would be Joseph Blea.
Now, this one hated sex workers. He used to throw trash at the burial site and had been dealing with the police from 1990 to 2009 because he frequented the areas where the drugs and sex workers were. And he got in trouble for breaking and entering and stealing women's underwear and jewelry.
He ended up whipping out his penis, and then he got caught. Now, he ran up to a sex worker and exposed himself. He tried to get a sex worker to go home with him, and he was a paying customer, and he tried to tie her up.
The authorities followed him for 4 days, and they found him creepy. He would go to the war zone and just watch the workers. He would keep tabs on them and then leave. I think he even went as far as having a little notebook.
Now, 8 months later, they checked out his home, and they found lots of women's underwear and jewelry there.
Now, none of the bodies did have jewelry, and the police were concerned about that. And they also found a small tag off a tree. They decided to look into this tree tag situation, and they realized that he would frequent this nursery between 2003 and 2006, and this particular tag was 8 feet underground.
He ended up being arrested for an unrelated crime. He had sexually assaulted someone. He got 90 years, and he was linked by DNA to a sex worker on her belt buckle.
Now, he spoke to a cellmate and called them trashy. He said he had hit one of the West Mesa sex workers that had been part of the missing 11.
Well, how do you feel about his guilt surrounding these murders?
Now, when it comes to this creepo, I feel like he could potentially be connected, but not in the way you think. This guy is so observant, frowning, honestly, on what sex workers' world was about, and I truly believe this man knows who the killer is. I feel like he followed these guys.
So like a copycat.
Exactly like a copycat. I feel like when this guy's family let go of him because they found out he was this disgusting, perverted creep, I feel like he had nothing but time and decided to watch, and I feel like he kept following along. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he went in there and threw trash there because he just wanted to be close to the bodies.
Kind of like a Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs behind to find his way back there.
Yeah, ew.
Do we know what his issue is with sex workers?
I think he looks at it as like a dirty, disgusting sin. I feel like he thinks he's some sort of prophet to abolish and keeping women's panties as prizes.
Well, guys, watch your children. There are so many seriously disturbing people out there.
There definitely is. Today I want to focus on the first couple of victims and talk about their story. We will definitely be doing a second and third part to talk about the other women's stories as well. But let's see what we can find out here, and so far with what I know and who did what.
Well, let's start with Victoria Chavez.
Victoria shows me that this part of town was where nightmares became true. She shows me she tried her hardest to stay away from all of the sex and drugs going on here. But a lot of her friends and people she cared about got involved, and she wanted to prevent people from getting involved. So she would hang out with people and try to stop them from doing this sort of thing. But unfortunately, I see that she might have had some run-ins with some men, pretty abusive ones, men that drink. She started to get a tough exterior. She shows me she was starting to become afraid of nothing. Now, she was raped many times over. She was raped by her first pimp. I believe the pimp ended up overdosing and something along those lines. Pity. And she shows me her second pimp was a really good one. This guy would try to take care of his girls. She felt like she was really getting somewhere. She also had dreams of getting out of here. Her sex worker friends and her would often talk about living the fancy life and getting enough money to make it happen. And there was this guy, and I believe that they called them Johns, but I see that this particular guy was someone who was regular for these women. I'm also seeing something shifted. I think he became unhinged. I feel like he had a secondary partner who was involved in these crimes with him, and I also feel like he couldn't do this just by himself one way or another. I am sensing that this guy would do exchanges for drugs instead of money, and the secondary person I feel like is a dirty cop who always had some sort of hand in all of the drug part of the town. Now, this cop was not interested in sex workers at all. I feel like he felt like they brought down the drug cartel. A lot of them did owe money, and he was just not happy about any of that. I feel like this John guy, we're going to call him John, would basically be the one to pick up the girls, and then he would bring his cop friend into it.
Now, was this John guy a cop as well?
Oh no. He did have a great relationship with the dirty cops. Other cops would take the scent off of him. Now, he was the guy who would pay off the police to look the other way. I feel like he was pretty well known in the community. I also feel like the cop had this porn stash. I feel like he was extremely racist, especially towards Black and Hispanic people. Often mocked other cultures. Reminded me of that George Mendes security guard from Orange is the New Black. The John guy was more attractive looking. He had muscles, he took care of himself, and pretty charming. He would often help a lot of the specific sex workers out of their debt.
Now, was Victoria one of the regulars?
Yes, and she wasn't afraid of him. He was usually pretty decent as far as a John goes. He was a little stingy when it came to the drugs, but from what he wanted, he didn't rape any of these women, so they felt good about their working relationship. Now, she shows me that this day, he reminded her that she owed him, and she wanted to pay for it in sexual favors, but she also wanted to have some sort of running tab.
Now, that's a very sad reality to this lifestyle. It's like a revolving door. It's really hard to get out of this.
Yeah, that's kind of what she shows me. Now, I think this cop had a sex worker almost get him in trouble once, and I think he's had a hate on for them ever since. Blames them for that. Anyways, she shows me that she had gotten into John's vehicle, which I believe is a black something or other. I really don't know. I'm terrible with vehicles. It's a small car. It seems pretty spacious, though. A very clean car in comparison to others. She shows me that this time he took her to the burial area to park. And she had made some sort of joke on how he was going to take her there to kill her.
Was the cop with them?
Nope. He was trailing them, though. As soon as they pulled up, he parked behind them. I see that she started asking questions because she knew exactly who it was, because these women stayed away from this guy. Anytime they'd see him on the street, they'd go the other way because he was a jerk. John told her to shut up, and the cop took her out of the vehicle and cuffed her and pushed her up against the vehicle. Now, I don't believe he sexually assaulted her. However, I do believe he took everything she had out of her pockets. I believe she had a small amount of drugs. I'm going to say meth. She had a spoon and something else as well. She had some cash as well, and he took everything. He told her he had to take it all to get the money back. He did take her rings. He took her earrings. He took her clothes. He took a bag and put it over her head. She screamed and screamed, and the more she did, the more air she was running out of. Now, from what she shows me, this John guy came out of the car and watched him strangle her with the bag over her head. Now, once she died, he then buried her. She was not the first victim, and I know they did an extensive search for more bodies and bones, but there are at least 3 grave sites, and he would bury them from one place to the next. He would shift them.
So they just buried the bodies in this place.
Yeah, and then they would take their stuff and leave. Now, she shows me that her death was suffocation. She also shows me that she got the bitch right in the face. She said she fought him hard. She had some nice heels on, too, and kicked him in the dick and left a real nice shiner right on his face. So she says that as they were all getting left there, all of the spirits found each other. They would be there as like moral support to assist them. And they all stayed. They didn't want to leave because they wanted to be there because they knew more would come.
Is this why the police ignored this?
Yeah. The woman detective who wrote the list of names she thought were all connected, Ida, was the only one who did, and she knew this person personally as well. He would laugh in her face about wanting to find out what happened to these women. He was openly ignorant. He'd say insulting and disrespectful things, and he always treated all the families that came forward like crap, never engaged in any conversation or investigation, and got pissed off at people who did take an interest in this.
Now, the next person that we are going to talk about is Michelle Valdez. She was the woman who was 4 months pregnant.
I know that each story is tragic in itself, but my God, when I connected to Michelle and her baby, I'm seeing a boy, by the way, the two of them at least have each other. She was obsessed with her daughter and still watches over her. I believe her daughter is a mom herself now. Her daughter is beautiful and so special, and she watches over her every single day, and she thanks God that this kid did not take the same path she did.
Is the father to her unborn child one of the Johns?
She actually had a boyfriend, and I think she was pretty clean. She would use condoms and protect herself as much as she could while doing this, and I'm seeing that she was still using, but it wasn't as much as she was previously. She shows me her boyfriend was pretty pushy when it came to drug use, so she felt like she didn't really have a choice, which is sad. She also shows me that he may have been the direct pimp. She said he wasn't the nicest, but she had worse boyfriends. He did get on the case of other Johns that would have sex with her if they didn't pay her enough, so she liked that perk. Her boyfriend would take all of her money pretty much and leave her very little. That part was the hardest for her dating this guy. And she basically had the same story as Victoria. The guy was a good regular. She wasn't looking for drugs. She was looking for cash. He drove her out there, and the cop met them, did the same thing. She did plead with them for being pregnant, but they said that her baby might as well not be born because it's going to be like its mom. Now, she shows me that this John guy did get involved with her death. Seems like he held her down and was focusing on her facial features and pushing her head down while he cuffed her. He apparently really liked her, and she shows me he bought her gifts before and was really confused as to why he did it. Now, she shows me that it was for a paycheck. She knows that. And she also is showing me that this guy is now dead. But we will get into that in the next episode.
Absolutely. Now, there is a lot to cover in this, and so much to uncover.
Yes, I'm trying to find out if there were different people involved as time carried on, because everyone says the cop was involved, but only half of them have said this particular John guy was involved.
Maybe there was more than one John that this cop hired so that it wasn't the same face, because then the girls would start talking about, giving a description, like, stay away from this guy now.
It's very, very possible.
Well, can't wait to dive into the rest of this. Next week, we will be covering part 2 of the Susan Powell episode, and then we will be covering the boys' perspective of what took place. Now, you're not going to want to miss it. Until next time, guys, stay freaked